The purpose of this lesson is to fulfill the Day 5 Innovative Classroom Activity exercise that students must complete to make up a lost school day. The topic of this activity is absolute value. Now, I do have all the Common Core standards that go along with this lesson that you can pause and read for yourself here, as well as the I can statements. One of the most important I can statements perhaps that we'll be working with is I can determine the absolute value of a rational number as its distance from 0 on the number line, and I can interpret absolute value as magnitude for a positive or negative quantity in a real-world situation. I'm going to try to rush through some of these slides that students can pause and read for themselves in order to save time and keep our PowerPoint presentation under 15 minutes. A student should expect to spend about 1 hour on this activity. Now, excuse me. Here is a very important definition, and the top of the slide is what is absolute value? The absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on a number line. Because the distance can never be negative, the absolute value of a number can never be negative either. Now, when you take the absolute value of a number, you always end up with a positive number, or 0. Whether the input was positive or negative, or 0, the output is always positive, or 0. For instance, the absolute value of 3, and we know this is identifying absolute value because of these two straight lines, equals 3. The absolute value of 3 equals 3. And the absolute value of negative 3 equals 3 also because it is 3 places away from 0. Now let's look at an example of how distance can never be 0. Let's say that at 0, at this point here, this is my driveway at home. Now, if I turn right, I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or any indefinite number of miles. And this 6, for instance, we'll say I travel 6. This absolute value would be 6 because I'm 6 spaces away from 0, whether that would be 6 miles, 6 inches, 6 whatever. Now let's say instead of going right, I turn left. Now if I turn left and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces on a number line, that's negative 6. However, if I pull out my driveway and turn left and drive 6 miles, then I have driven not necessarily negative 6, but the absolute value would be I had driven 6 miles. So the absolute value of negative 6 is 6, regardless of whether the integer is positive or negative. Absolute value, the results will be positive. Now let's look at how we write it. Now absolute value is written as these two straight lines with x inside for any number x. Now that x could be any number. It could be 1 million. It could be negative 1 million. Absolute value is going to be denoted whenever you have a number inside these two brackets, inside these two straight lines. Now we have a question. What is the value of absolute value of negative 7? Now you can pause for a moment and see if you can figure it out for yourself. Okay, I hope you have. Now, when I look for absolute value of negative 7, I want to see how far away is negative 7 on a number line from 0. It does not matter that negative 7 is a negative number. I just want to know exactly how many spaces is negative 7 from 0. And it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It is 7 spaces away. And because it is 7 spaces away, I can write down that negative 7, the absolute value of negative 7 is positive 7. And this is maybe how I could do that. Just go here, negative 7, straight down, equals 7. It does not matter whatever sign your integer is inside the absolute value brackets, your absolute value is always going to be positive. Now notice I didn't put a positive sign or plus sign here. I just wrote 7 because that's understood that that is positive. All right, let's go on to the next slide then. Okay, here is a real-world example that uses absolute value. Cletus could not use his credit card if his balance is less than negative $500. How could this be expressed using absolute value? How can we describe what the absolute value represents? Well, let's think about this for a minute. A lot of credit cards will have a limit. Now that limit can be looked at as a debt and it can be looked at as a negative. So if Cletus has negative $500 on his balance, then we can say that after he has gone $500 in debt, he can no longer charge anything on his card. Now, the way I would write that might be going with those brackets. What is the absolute value of 500? And the absolute value of 500, negative 500, would be simply 500. So once his balance is less than $500, then he can't spend any more. Now, this would represent how much money he has that he owes. He has ran up a debt of $500, which would be $500 less than what he has. And once he gets to that point, he can no longer charge anything on his card. So negative 500, the absolute value of that would be $500. So once he has spent $500 on his card, once he has charged that much, he cannot charge anymore. Now, let's go on to another slide. Okay, here we have a slide that shows a number line and a question. What is the value of absolute value of negative 4.5? Now, with this one, with our number line, we can kind of look at it and see what we need to do. Now, somehow or another, the bracket got a little bit too far this way, but on this number line, negative 4.5 would fall right around there. This is where negative 4.5 would be. Now, how far is 4.5, negative 4.5 from 0? Well, it's 1, 2, 3, 4.5 spaces away from 0. So the absolute value of negative 4.5 would simply be 4.5, positive 4.5. Here's another real-world word problem that involves us finding absolute value. It says, a submarine is negative 35 feet above sea level. What is the distance from sea level using absolute value? Okay, well, 0 sea level would be the 0 that we would need to refer to in this word problem. At negative 35 feet from that 0, we would still have to go 35 feet away from 0. So, in this situation, what does the number 35, negative 35 represents? Well, that's how far the submarine is below 0, below sea level. Use an absolute value to represent the distance. We could say the submarine's distance from sea level is, well, in this case, we could say that the absolute value of 35 feet. So the submarine's distance below sea level is 35 feet. I did not need to put negative 35, although that does kind of look like a negative sign there. It's just 35 feet. So negative 35, the absolute value of negative 35 below 0, below sea level, would be that the submarine is 35 feet below sea level. Okay. Now, just to recap, what is absolute value? The absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on a number line. Because a distance can never be negative, the absolute value of a number can never be negative either. When you take the absolute value of a number, you always end up with a positive number or 0. Whether the input was positive or negative or 0, the output is always positive or 0. For instance, like we said, the absolute value of 3 is 3, and the absolute value of negative 3 is 3 also. Now here we have some absolute value problems. Take a moment to pause the video and see if you can figure these out on your own. Okay, assuming that you have taken the time to pause your video and see if you can figure these out on your own, we'll go ahead and check and see how you did. Well, the absolute value of negative 75 is simply 75. The absolute value of negative 9 is simply 9. The absolute value of 2.5 is simply 2.5. The absolute value of negative 3.14 is 3.14. The absolute value of negative 9.7 is 9.7. The absolute value of 21, 21. The absolute value of negative 278 is 278. The absolute value of negative 9 1/3 is 9 1/3. The absolute value of 7/8 is 7/8. And the absolute value of 64 and 0.7805 is simply 64.7805. Now notice that regardless of whatever the sign was, whether it be negative or positive, on the input here, the output, these are all positive. So one quick rule of thumb could be, regardless of whatever the sign is, you can just rewrite the number as a positive. If it's got a negative, just don't write it with a negative. That would be one quick, easy way to look at it. Now, here we have a word problem that involves a chart. The following table shows 2 test scores for 4 students in Mr. Hall's class, as well as the change in score between the 2 tests. Now, when you look at the chart, let's look and see what our values are. We have one column for student names, another one for what they got on their first test, another column for the score they got on their second test, and how much change there was from test 1 to test 2. Now here we have Sally Bell, who got a 94 on the first test, and then a 98. She went up from 94 to 98. She increased by 4 points. Billy Bob, he got an 89 the first test, but then on the second test he got an 83. He went down 6 for negative 6. Cletus got a 93 on the first test, and then he got 90 on the second test, so he went down 3 points, a negative 3. Mary made 90 on the first test, and then she got a 95 on the second test, so she went up 5 points. Now, when we look at absolute values here, we could simply say that that with our absolute values, that Sally Bell, she had a change of absolute value of 4 points. The absolute value of Billy Bob's scores from test 1 to test 2 would be simply 6. The absolute value of Cletus, his change from test 1 to test 2 would be 3. And Mary, her absolute value of her test would be 5. Now, one of the questions that might go along with a chart like this is, who changed the most? Who changed the most? Well, 6 is a greater value than 4, 3, and 5, so Billy Bob will have changed the most. Now, some people might look at this and think, well, he changed by negative 6, but when we're looking at absolute change, we're not saying who improved the most or who improved the least. We're asking who changed the most. And because he changed by 6, even though it was going down by 6, still yet he changed the most. So Billy Bob in this case would have changed the most. The person whose score stayed closest to the original score would be Cletus. 3 is the least value of these, and so it shows that he changed the least. So even though he went down from 93 to 90, he changed the least. His absolute value and change would be 3. Okay. Now let's go on and look at the next slide. Now, just a reminder, distance is never going to be negative. So even though it may be negative numbers that you start out with, when you're talking in terms of absolute value, how far away are they from 0, your response is always going to be positive. I hope that this video helped you and will prepare you for the activities that go along with this lesson. You'll find those PDFs